you rely on your training, Danny. And, the military is great about realistic training. And we spent hours in the desert practicing scenarios where we would be attacked, where they would try to cut off the convoy, and steal our resources. And guess what, Danny? That happened in Iraq. So the fact that we were able to create realistic training, practice it so much that it just became muscle memory. You know what I mean? I don't have to think, you act. And that's what we wanted our troops to be able to do. And I think that happens a lot in adversity. We're fond of saying we train like we fight. And we do. It is hard, realistic training. I saw people in a combat environment who maybe back home during realistic training were like real warriors. But they fell apart in combat. When reality hit, they couldn't handle it. And they fell apart, and we had to work with them because we couldn't have a liability out there.
Hey, let's welcome Lisa Firmin, a combat veteran, a retired Air Force colonel, writer, and an award-winning author. Good to see you here.
Thank you for having me here today, Danny. I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. So could you share your story with me, where you come from and some of the facts about your life?
Sure, that's a great question. And I could do that in probably 2 minutes, or I can do it in 5 hours. So it kind of depends on how you ask the question. You said my story. My goodness, we're going to be here all night. No, just kidding. I am a very proud Tejana. That means I'm from Texas. I'm from South Texas. My ancestry is Mexican-American, so I'm real proud of that. I'm a Latina. Was the first in my family to go to college and to graduate. And I'm real proud of that. That's real important. Education is really important. So my parents really pushed it, so they were very proud that I was able to get that done, be the first one. After that, I joined the military, and I served 30 years. So I rose to the rank of full colonel. 06 is the actual grade. And I've been a commander throughout a lot of my career. I really enjoyed being a leader and being a commander of the troops, the airmen, wherever I was stationed. So 30 years is a long time, moving an average of 1.7 years. So that's uprooting your family and moving quite a bit. And that's hard on military families. It's hard on the active duty person as well. And then after the military, I went right into higher education. I really wanted to do something that made a difference, and higher education at a Hispanic served institution seemed like a perfect mix for me. So that's what I did at the University of Texas in San Antonio. And my first role there was an associate provost, kind of overseeing diversity and recruitment for faculty and staff and for students. So I'm the founder of the UTSA Top Scholar Program. And then later on, I became the founder of the Veterans and Military Affairs Department. So you can just tell by that little bit I'm telling you that I like to create, I'm innovative, and I appreciate the opportunity to be able to do that in higher education to help first generation students, to help all students really be successful. And then later on in the career there in higher ed, I spent 12 years in higher ed, was focused on veterans and military affiliated students, trying to help them be successful, get to the finish line to get a degree. So I really enjoyed that. And then a few years ago, I started my own business. I kind of did it while I was still working. I just kind of have it ready. And my business is called Carrington Firmin LLC, and it's primarily a consulting training business. I'm an author, of course, you mentioned that. So I've published 2 books, working on my 3rd book now, and we can talk about that a little bit later.
Great. I'd like to explore more about your military career. So you said 30 years in the Air Force. Could you walk me through your career, what you did, what you focused on, maybe some of the stories from being deployed or stationed overseas?
Sure, yeah. I didn't say that my father was in the military. So I grew up in a military household and grew up going to school overseas a lot to Department of Defense schools. So I was very used to living in different countries and being among different cultures. My dad served in the Navy and the Air Force. So for me, it was kind of a natural fit, almost like a legacy. That's what your dad does. That's the family business. So go in the military, right? So when I joined, I came in and they called it like a personnel officer, kind of like HR world. But of course, every position in the military has a tie to the peacetime role and then the wartime role. So my wartime role was expeditionary mission combat support. Basically, I was in charge of building up an air base from scratch, basically from and we used to practice a lot, going to bare fields and bringing in our infrastructure to create like a tent city and to protect it. So that's kind of what I trained to do throughout my career. But I was fortunate to be a commander, to be a leader of several organizations while I was in the military. And that really prepared me for ultimately my combat role, which was in the Sunni Triangle of Iraq. I was the Expeditionary Mission Support Group commander at a base there in the Sunni Triangle. It was called LSA Anaconda, or it was called Balad Air Base.
And obviously you had a huge experience leading people. What are some of your leadership principles or maybe a philosophy that you that you can share with me?
Sure, I'll share that with you in a minute. Let me say also that I've had jobs throughout the military, right, throughout the Air Force. I worked at our headquarters at the Pentagon, and I think that's important to say that I actually worked at our headquarters because that's where all the huge decisions are made that impact all the way down to what I call boots on the ground. So I was real proud to have several staff jobs in addition to command jobs. And in the Pentagon, I worked Air Force retention, so retention policy for over 370,000 airmen. I also worked in the generals group, we called it at the time. And that's basically handling all general officer management, their reassignments, promotions, demotions, if that was necessary too. Basically, all the HR stuff around the general officer population that we had. So very selective assignment, but I really enjoyed that. So especially working at our headquarters, I think it was impactful. And then you asked me about a little bit more about my military leadership principles, right? Or just my leadership principles. Well, obviously I learned a lot. I mean, I went to the military with a degree already. I got commissioned through officer training school and had my commission that way. I was not an ROTC cadet, even though I was an ROTC commander later in my career, and I did not go to the Air Force Academy. So my source of commission was officer training school. So, and it was 90 days. They used to joke and call us 90-day wonders, so we came in right away. They trained us how to wear a uniform and do all that stuff. People actually thought, Danny, that I was prior service because the way I carried myself. That's because I grew up in an enlisted man's household. My father was a sergeant in the military and taught us quite a bit. So I kind of knew a lot of the acronyms and I just kind of, I guess, acted like I belonged because of the way I think I was raised. So it kind of helped me get a head start in the training. So let's see, leadership, I would say that, and I got two master's degrees, one in organizational theory and human resource management, and another one in strategic studies. So studying leadership is one thing, and that's real important, right? But I think the military gives you an outstanding example because they give you opportunities to apply the leadership principles that you learn. So the application of leadership is certainly different than just the study of leadership, right? So I think those of us in the military who have the opportunity to study and actually apply our leadership and see how it works, and especially in adversity, you know, we're fond of saying that we adapt and overcome, that we know how to make things out of pretty much nothing because we've been able to do that with very few resources when needed. So I would say, I've honed my skills over the years, especially in higher ed as well. But I would say my top kind of three leadership principles, and I've kind of published my leadership philosophy over the years. When I took over my first organization as a commander, my first squadron, I sat down with my direct reports and went over my leadership philosophy. I didn't ever want them to not know where they stood and what their leader was all about. And that was important to me because as I came up in the ranks, I didn't have that benefit. So I knew how important that is, right? So I would say number one for me is a competency is the most important thing. I call it competency is job one. You have to be competent in your job. You can't pretend, you can't fake it. You can only do that for so long. So you need to read all the regulations. You need to have the on-the-job training. You need to know everything that governs your job and do it to the best of your ability. And then other things will fall into place for that. So that's number one. You got to be competent. You cannot fake it. All right. And number two would be know your strengths and your weaknesses. This is really important for people to do. And I think a lot of people really don't do a good job at this. They think they know who they are, but they don't really act on that. And it's one thing to take all these different tests like the Myers-Briggs, the DISC, these self-evaluations, true colors. There's all kinds of self-assessments you can take and figure out what kind of person you are, what kind of leader you are. So I think that's important. And I did quite a few of those. And again, the military provided us great opportunity to do that. But it's one thing to know, okay, these are my strengths. These are my weaknesses. What am I going to do about them? Right? So I think it's real important that you know your strengths and weaknesses. And that way you can surround yourself with people that mitigate your weaknesses and amplify your strengths. And that's what I've been able to do in every profession I've had, the military, peacetime combat, higher education, as an entrepreneur. And that is so important because if you don't know yourself, truly know yourself, then you're going to be making some of the same mistakes over and over again and hiring the people that don't amplify your strengths and who actually hurt your business more than they help your business. So that's important. Know your strengths and weaknesses. And then number three, I'd say, is define success for yourself. This is really important. So many people, Danny, are on a path that they believe they should be on because someone told them to be on that path, whether it's their parents, their girlfriend, their wife, their husband. And I'm here to tell you that you need to define success for yourself. You need to find your path. And because the road to success, the road to being a leader at the highest levels is fraught with obstacles and barriers. And you're not going to want to go through all that if this is not really your dream, your vision for success, right? That happened. I saw a lot of people in the military and also in higher ed who said, I'm here to get a degree in this particular field. Well, is that what you really want to do? No, it's just what my parents want me to do, right? Well, then again, they're probably going to end up changing their major because that's not what they want to do. And they may be wasting time by taking courses they really don't need to take. So that would be my top three.
A lot of what I hear is self-reflection, and I can totally really agree with that because I see this in my life, how looking into myself, learning what I want and how I operate helps me then lead other people. And that's definitely something that resonates with me. And I've heard it from many people as well, including you, who reemphasize this fact. And I just want to make sure listeners, if you're listening to this, you think about this because it really works.
Yeah, it's practical advice. It's easy to say, another thing to do and to implement, execute on a daily basis. People do not like confrontation, even with themselves. It's really hard to look deep at yourself and reflect on who you are, what you want to do, what your strengths and weaknesses are. But I would say you need to be brutally honest with yourself. If you want to succeed in life and succeed in business, succeed as a leader in any field, these are some of the things that you need to do, and you need to face and be honest with yourself.
What about dealing with uncertainty, short term or maybe long term, where you don't know what's going to happen next? And say in combat, these kinds of environments are also, they are high stakes. You may have people's lives that are in your hands, and your decision may lead to some of the consequences there. How do you deal with your own emotions and ensure rational decision making under those circumstances and the environment that pressures you to act fast and maybe be emotional?
Be unemotional, I mean. So I think what you rely on your training, Danny, and the military is great about realistic training. And before I went to Iraq, we actually went to places that were like almost like desert environments. And we practiced convoy training in the desert. We had real people, other airmen, playing to be what we call the OP4, opposing forces. And then we would have like an enemy, and then we would have us, and we would plan what we were doing, our convoy operations. Good. At this time, when I went to Iraq, it was very early in '04, and the Air Force had not put a lot of convoy operations kind of instructions and regulations out there. So our training programs, so we kind of discovered and created our own training programs because we knew this is the environment we're going to go into. And that realistic training, I mean, my organization oversaw security forces, force protection, civil engineers, communication. I mean, basically it was like a small infrastructure, like a city. So these individuals worked for me. So I had all the assets that I could use to create our own convoy operations training. And that's what we did. And we spent hours in the desert practicing scenarios where we would be attacked, where they would try to cut off the convoy, and steal our resources. And guess what, Danny? That happened in Iraq. So the fact that we were able to create realistic training, practice it so much that it just became muscle memory. You know what I mean? I don't have to think, you act. And that's what we wanted our troops to be able to do. And I think that happens a lot in adversity. You practice, we say, we're fond of saying, we train like we fight. And we do. It is hard, realistic training. Some of the training I had were, okay, you're going to go to this particular place, and it was an Army base that basically had nothing on the field. And okay, you build a tent city. Who do you bring in first? What modules of deployment do you bring in first? And we had to plan it first, of course, and then we brought in who we thought needed to be there first. I mean, people say, oh, you bring your tents in first. Well, no, if you don't have security to guard your tents, how are you going to, so you have to put everything in perspective, and then you plan your deployment, and then you execute it. And so I've done that so many times, in training, realistic training, that when we went to Iraq and did the same thing, it was like, wow, this is what happens when you train like you fight and you train realistically. And you have people playing the enemy, playing even media, all these kind of things. So I think the military is great about training you, but the individual person, what makes one person more resilient than another? I think that's a good question, Danny, for some people, because I saw people in a combat environment who maybe back home during realistic training were like real warriors, but they fell apart in combat. When reality hit, they couldn't handle it, and it fell apart, and we had to work with them. So because we couldn't have a liability out there. So I think that's important, is how does one become resilient? And I think part of it's training, and part of it is some innate, in Spanish we have the word ganas, the inner desire, the determination to get ahead, to do something. So I think part of it is a combination of grit, combination of resilience. But I would say the training I had was outstanding, so realistic that I felt like when I got to the combat environment, that everything I had done before was preparing me for being there to do the job I had. But you have to put it in perspective, right? The combat environment is different. I didn't lead in higher education like I would in combat. In combat, I used to say every day is like a dog year, and you can see the benefit of your achievement of working all day. You can see what you're building. You're building a tent city. You can see it kind of come together. You can see and everybody's contributing to the mission. It's very clear. And maybe in higher ed, sometimes the mission wasn't clear, or people were confused about the chain of command or something like that. So it's a completely different environment having to go from one area to another. I recall once in higher ed, one of my administrative assistants was working on something, and she sent an email out and inadvertently sent it to like several vice presidents, pretty high level, right? And it wasn't supposed to go to them. So she came to see me, and she was really upset, thinking that maybe I was going to fire her or something. Danny, I looked at her and I said, okay, are you going to do that again? She says, no, ma'am. And I said, okay. I said, did anybody get hurt? She says, no, ma'am. I said, did anybody lose a leg? No, ma'am. They get killed? No. I said, okay, well then just don't do that again. And I just let her go. And she looked at me like she thought I was going to, chew her out or do something, reprimand her or whatever. But she was harder on herself than I would be, that I needed to be. And I looked at her and realized she was never going to do that again, right? So you keep things in perspective. Now, if something happened in combat and someone made a mistake, we have to correct it on the spot, because you're right, their lives at stake. And you have to be able to lead and make decisions, especially we had casualties. And when the first casualties hit and people started dying, then it became real for some of the people maybe who didn't think it was going to be real, right? So it was a difficult environment. We lost a lot of our contract operations because there were people from different countries who came in and were providing maybe food support and that kind of stuff, cleaning and helping us out. As soon as people started dying, they left because they didn't take an oath to serve like we did. So we couldn't just say, oh, we're leaving. We couldn't do that. We had to stay there, build the air base, protect it, harden it, and get ready for all the missions that were coming. And there was probably no clearer objective than our mission was that we had when we went in there. And you can see that every day. You see the accomplishments. So I don't want to talk about politics at all, because that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about leadership. So I'm grateful for the opportunities I had in the military. I wouldn't be the leader I am today if I hadn't experienced those.
Now let's talk about how your experience and the skills that you've learned in the military over the decades, how you apply them to your business, maybe to your books, to your public work that you do. Maybe some of the skills or principles stand out that you apply almost every day now.
Sure, that's a great question. I think, and I've actually written about that in Phi Kappa Phi Forum. It's the United States' oldest National Honor Society, and it's all majors. And I'm a member of Phi Kappa Phi, and they have a magazine called Phi Kappa Phi Forum. And I wrote an article, and it was called like Deploying Leadership. And it was about skills that will make any grade, make any environment. And I wrote about how I could lead in combat, and then those skill sets, I just applied them differently. The context changed in higher ed, but the foundational leadership skills were the same. Perseverance, organizational skills, adapting and overcoming. Higher ed is no different than the military in some aspects. I mean, it's a very bureaucratic organization. And money is tight, and the military, the same thing. So we had to come up with creative ways to do things. And, and in Iraq, one of our biggest problems, and we use a term called LIMFAC, limiting factor. And it was the lack of cement, good quality cement early on. Eventually, we ended up building our own cement factories, plants. But at that time, we couldn't. We had to kind of rely on other contractors. So cement was coming in. Things were falling apart. And I'm talking barriers. We're trying to get barriers made to help us from blast fragmentations, from hurting our people, to protect us. And we couldn't get good quality cement. The ingenuity of the troops there that I was with, my civil engineers, they came up with outstanding workarounds until we could wait long enough to get good quality cement. I'm talking several weeks, like 4 weeks. And that's a lifetime in a combat environment, right? So I was so proud of our young civil engineers, what they came up with, the ideas they pitched to me to create. I mean, you're in the desert. What do you have a lot of? You have a lot of sand, right? You have a lot of sand. And we had a lot of wood. So they end up building barriers and filling them with sand. And that would protect us act as a fortification kind of blockers until we could get the cement in. So that's an example of a workaround kind of thing. And it happens the same way in higher education, different ways you work around. So I'd say perseverance is one of the biggest ones. Never giving up. When someone says no, you find another way to do it, as long as it's legal. That's another thing I'm fond of saying is I'm not going to jail for anyone. I will always remain within the legal parameters of whatever role I'm taking on. But I will push the envelope. I will ask questions. I'll find out why. If there's a rule about something, well, is that rule still valid today? Do I need to change it? So I ask a lot of questions. I push the envelope. I push my people. I have high standards. I think that's important. And most people will aspire to those high standards, right? So I think that's important. So perseverance, never, like I said, never giving up, working towards a goal, making sure your people know what the mission is. In higher ed, sometimes the staff would not be sure what the mission was. So I made it a point to make sure they understand what the mission. How do they fit in? Everyone wants to know how they contribute. So you talk to them and you explain to them, you're here and you fit into the mission this way. So they can articulate it. And you don't have a vision or a mission that's so long and lengthy or people can't even recite it. Right? They need to be able to regurgitate that back to you in just a few words. So I think it's important letting people know where they stood and how they contribute to the overall mission. And then I think really it's important to recognize your people when they do things that are really well. Have award programs, that's important. I'm happy to say that I was able to lead a team to create a presidential level award at UTSA for an area that really hadn't been recognized before. And that's important. You got to practice what you preach, basically. So I was able to do some of that. So that was a long answer to your question, Danny. So I'm not sure if I answered it tightly enough for you.
No, that's great. You definitely shared some specific principles that everyone can apply to their lives. Yeah, before we end, let's talk about your books. You've written, what you did as an author, if you want to talk about that.
Yes. Thank you, Danny, because you did ask that question, kind of how I applied my skill sets. I think project management is a big thing we do in the military. We're tasked with certain projects, and sometimes they're years long in the making, and you have to have milestones and that kind of thing. So I was able to take that skill set and use it as an author, have a vision for a book, and then put milestones on how I'm going to get this book done, who am I going to interview, and when's it going to come out, how do I get a publisher? I mean, all that stuff. So I am proud to say that I was able to do that, take those skill sets and use them. When I talk to my publisher, I say, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to deliver on this date. When are you going to deliver as the editor, right? And I'm going to show you, if I can, the books that I've written. So the first book is called Stories from the Front. And I'm really proud because this is an award-winning book. You see a silver medal thing here. It's called Stories from the Front, Pain, Betrayal, and Resilience on the MST Battlefield. MST is military sexual trauma. I wrote a book about it because I thought it was time for me to tell my story. I'm in the middle here, but I told 14 stories. I interviewed people from the Vietnam era to present day, and 2 of the people in the book are still serving. It was important to me to share the whole continuum of harm from verbal harassment, sexism, all the way to rape that was occurring in the military and that continues to occur. I wanted to educate the public on it and educate and let people know that this is an issue that happens to anybody and everybody, male and female. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter your age. It doesn't matter what branch of service you're in. And that book had every branch of service represented, even Coast Guard. I thought that was important. So I was able to take the skill sets I learned in the military to kind of basically become an author. I mean, I already had some writing skills, but to be able to plan it, and I designed the front cover. I designed the whole thing. Basically, I sat down with someone. This is what I want it to be, and they brought it to fruition. I hired the right people to help me. I have a great publisher. The second book I wrote is called Latina Warrior, and this is an autobiography told through poems, prose, and art. A very unique way to do it. And I partnered with another veteran, a woman, a combat veteran. She's an Army vet. And she's an artist. She illustrated all the original poems in the book. So there's 50 pieces of art along with 50 poems that talk about my journey in the military. There's a poem called Command, about leadership. There's a poem about mentorship. There's poems about my early life. There's poems about sexual assault. There's poems about therapy, PTSD, those kind of things. So I really wanted to talk openly about my journey in a way that maybe people could read it kind of quickly and then see the image, the art that came with it. So I was real proud of that book. The book I'm working on now is called Deploying Entrepreneurship, Journeys of Veteran Business Owners. And it's going to be no more than 20. I've already interviewed several more than half, but there'll be no more than 20 actual vets who created or founded their own businesses. And I'm meeting some outstanding entrepreneurs that some serve just initial tour, some serve 20 years, some serve longer than that, and their businesses are all diverse, just like they are. And I really want to showcase the stories of those of us who've served, because our journeys are really interesting. And frankly, I believe everybody has a story, right? So I'm really excited that I'm working on this third book, and it'll be come out in 2026.
And the two books that you showed to me, are they on Amazon or
Sure. Yeah,
somewhere?
you can buy them at any place. They're readily available on Amazon. They're also available on my website. And I hope that you put my kind of like a banner with my website. It's lisacarringtonfirmin.com. And you can purchase them there. As a business person, I've also trademarked Latina Warrior. So the words I've trademarked, and I have merchandise, and I'm really excited. I partnered with another woman veteran, and she has a sock company. She's going to be in the entrepreneur book I'm writing, but she created a Latina Warrior sock, and it's just amazing. It's amazing when you get people together that are kind of like-minded. We've like experiences, similar experiences in the military, but we're entrepreneurs. We have ideas, we're creative, and for us to collaborate, it's just exciting. It's fun for me to do that. And to teach other people and to give back, right? So I'm excited. I have Latina Warrior merchandise now. I have shirts, I have socks. We have art that we're selling as well from the book. My business partner on that second book. So it's a journey, right? And someone asked me, well, how much is too much? I don't know. Yeah, I might be getting close now, because I mean, what more do I want to do, right? I was so fortunate that the University of Texas San Antonio named a space after me. It's the Colonel Lisa Carrington Veteran Lounge. And I think that's so cool, right? Because I am the founder of that department, but to have a space named after you, I mean, wow, I was so humbled by that. And then actually early this year, an organization called Shield of Sisters named a Pioneer Award after me too. And it's for those who are preventing sexual assault and harassment in the military. And they named it after me, and they're going to give it away every year to someone who's making a difference in that space. So I think what I'm trying to do, Danny, is make a difference, impact others. And I had a tough journey coming up, and I'm reaching back to help those behind me so they don't have a tough journey.
Hey, great work, and I'll definitely make sure the links to the books and your website are in the description. So if you're listening to this, just feel free to check the description and go buy the books. Well, thank you for sharing your story today, your leadership principles, and some of the advice and lessons. Truly appreciate your story, and great time today.
All right. Thank you, Danny. I appreciate again the opportunity. Thanks so much for helping to showcase some of our stories.